Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon, Chair. I would start with thanking the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, the Center for China Analysis and Strategy, New Delhi, and the Center of Advanced Strategic Studies, Pune, for having invited me to speak on this very complex subject. We've heard the point of view from the Air Force. I would like to go with the Chief of Air Staff, who said that we should fight with what we have. So I will present my talk in that framework of what we have. In December 2024, our External Affairs Minister, he's speaking to Deccan Herald, and he made a very important statement. I was wondering where security equilibrium has come from. He said at that time that it is in the interest of both India and China to reach an equilibrium. And conceptually, it's very difficult to do so because both the countries are changing in absolute terms, number one. Number two, they are changing vis-a-vis the world. So it's a very complex dynamic, and both the countries are changing in terms of their absolute power, as well as both countries changing in terms of the world also. So it's a very, very complex equation as per him. The world is changing, we are changing, their relationship with the world is changing, and our relationship with each other is changing. So when you look at the complexity of the whole thing, I personally feel the External Affairs Minister was speaking more about the overall power equilibrium, which encompasses the security equilibrium. So I will look at the security equilibrium, which does not stand independently. It stands with the other pillars of the equilibrium. And I will start with a small little explanation of what this strategic equilibrium should look like in terms of the two countries. Of course, my previous speaker also spoke about it. So within the existing circumstances of asymmetry of power, I will qualify that again, within the existing circumstances of asymmetry of power, it is important for India to get this strategic equilibrium. This equilibrium, which is a strategic balance, where both nations coexist, compete and coexist without overt conflict. So what does this strategic equilibrium enable India to do, which is so important for India at this cusp of time? Probably the most important thing which India has to do is what China did in 1990. And we will discuss that in a little while. But it has to get back to 8% minimum. And it has to get back to that 8% on a trot. So this security equilibrium will have to undergird this particular growth. It will have to create conditions for this growth, which should be unimpeded, at least till the time we reach our ambition of not being a great power, or a major power, but being a great power. That is where I would pitch the Indian ambitions at. If the Chinese are looking at themselves as a global power and the dominant power in the world, we are definitely a parallel civilization with equal weight. And as Mr. Ranade brought out in the morning, the biggest strength is our population and our markets. If we can't grow at 8% for the next 2.5 decades, we are not there in the race. So this security equilibrium is what is going to undergird it. Was there a security equilibrium earlier? That is one of the questions which came to my mind. Some scholars of international relations and international political economy have said that 90s was a period when there was a security equilibrium, was an equilibrium, not a security equilibrium. This equilibrium in the 90s, during the times of Narasimha Rao and then later on Rajiv Gandhi, is the one which led to the signing of the Border Peace and Tranquility Agreement in 1993. That Peace and Tranquility Agreement was the framework in which this equilibrium obtained. And at that point in time when this equilibrium was there were two major things which were there. The Chinese GDP and the Indian GDP were almost matching each other close to $300 billion. The GNI per capita, if I'm not mistaken, at that point in time, was in favor of India. Marginally maybe, but it was in favor of India. And the Chinese had realized that it was the time when they required a few years of unimpeded, undisturbed growth. And that's how their premiers had put it at that point in time, I do still recollect. To get to this economic threshold where they could then race into the dominant position in the world. So, important point in that was that when this equilibrium obtained, the Chinese imposed on us certain amount of agreements which actually put the boundary issue on the back burner. And they were able to deconflate two things, the boundary issue and trade. Like it came out in the morning, that's the time probably they wanted the major access into the Indian market. So they deconflated these two things with a set of agreements which they violated in 2020 very, very ashamedly. So I would say that there was an equilibrium. Yes, maybe it was a strategic pause. The Chinese probably looked at it as a strategic pause. They said that it will actually help them. So the most critical issue for them, which was the boundary issue, which they wanted to keep alive, was put on the back burner and was deconflated from trade, which we agreed to at that point in time. Fortunately for us, our eyes are open after 2020, and we have not allowed that deconflation again. So Chinese probably looked at that period of equilibrium as a strategic pause, a very unstable equilibrium, which was very important for them at that time, because it came at the backdrop of Guangdong, it came at the backdrop of a resurgent India, it came at the backdrop of India which was racing ahead. So the Chinese required that pause to catch up and increase the lead, so-called. So what are the takeaways from that point in time, that first equilibrium which obtained? So we know that a security equilibrium with China is very important, and it will be required by us to undergird our growth for the next 2.5 decades or so. It is required. But there is asymmetry of power, and we understand that. It's for us and our diplomacy and our statesmanship and our politicians and our military people to create those conditions which get you that equilibrium, is what I would say. So we must be able to get that equilibrium within this asymmetry of power, which is important for us. So when we get this equilibrium, like at that point in time, the Chinese deconflated the boundary issue, we must make sure that we protect our core interests while creating this equilibrium, which may involve a little give and take with the Chinese. It's not a one-sided process, of course. We must identify our own pressure points and vulnerabilities, our leverages, and within this equilibrium which we get, maybe we should be able to have a whole of the government approach to cover the pressure points and to leverage what we have. That is another important thing. The security equilibrium will be one of the important pillars. So we must realize that both the nations are rising. They are rising in a very, very competitive regional and global environment with all kinds of pressures. The rise is parallel, and there will have to be overlaps. So when these overlaps are there will be multiple fronts on which challenges will come. It will not be one front. So if we look only at security equilibrium, probably we'll be going wrong. We must look at other aspects of this equilibrium in terms of maybe our economy, yes, that's the most important thing. We must look at advanced technologies. We must look at our own soft power. We should look at our own diplomacy. We should look across the board and identify all elements which will contribute to this particular equilibrium. So what I will do is that I will lay out certain contours of this equilibrium in terms of what I should feel should be the constituents of it. And I'll wind up. So the key elements of this equilibrium, as has been brought out earlier, will be one has to be deterrence, but deterrence with engagement. So the first pillar of this particular equilibrium is deterrence with engagement. So we've already taken steps which are absolutely in place, and hats off to the government for that. Accelerated border development, the infrastructure is coming up beautifully. Rapid force modernization, it is happening. Maybe, like my previous speaker said, that there are some issues where probably some more foot on the accelerator will help, yeah. Technological advancement. Integration and restructuring of forces is something which is very important and which has been pending for a long point in time. If you want to have dominance in the Himalayas, then you have to have one integrated border on top in the northern sector, where you have an integrated theater to look at the Chinese. That's the most important thing. There has been certain realignment of forces, but that realignment of forces is not complete till the time we don't restructure their entire defense role, the role which they're going to play in that particular area. Their integration, their operationalization, and the doctrines which we have to develop for employment. So just switching forces and placing them in a particular position, to my mind, does not complete the menu. It will have to be completed in terms of their complete integration, the battlefield integration, their doctrinal and operational integration completed. So when we do that, that will be something which will add to the deterrence, and that is what is something which the Chinese understand when they look at it. They know that this has just been a temporary shift. So that's one part of it. The next part of it is the strategic partnerships, and you all understand that. And I must compliment again our government for playing out the strategic partnership in an excellent manner, where we know our thresholds, we know the red lines, and we know till where we can go in the strategic partnership, which will, at a point in time, can give us benefits. In terms of maybe intelligence sharing, yeah. So we've got assets which are deployed of our friendly countries, which give us logistic support, okay. So the correct integration in terms of joint war fighting, joint understanding, joint development of capabilities is in place. So I'm quite happy about that. So when I look at strategic partnerships, I look at these issues. We talk about the neutralization of proxies. We have proxies. We have one on the eastern side now, again, with the recent developments, one on the western side, which has remained a pain point from 1947, since our independence, and even before that. And the Chinese have been using these pain points continuously. It's only that We in the uniform, we look at the hard options. But the Chinese have been using, other than hard options, in terms of using these proxies for a very long point in time. Starting from our independence, and they've been doing it in a very subtle manner. It's just that we have not been able to decipher that application. So it's good for us to understand that these proxies will continue to be used. And to counter these proxies, we must develop our strategies, and we should be very, very careful about that. In terms of defense diplomacy, oh yeah, there is one point which I missed out. So when we are looking at the deterrence, it is very important for us to have parity in nuclear application. Please, I'm qualifying my words in a very careful manner. There has to be parity in nuclear application of forces. I am not saying any doctrinal changes, which is the same across the border, but there has to be parity in nuclear application of forces, and the audience will understand what that particular thing means. I will not go into the nuclear aspect beyond that. The nuclear asymmetry will be taken care of, and it will give us the deterrence punch which is required, which will be seen and which will be apparent to the Chinese also. We have to understand and identify that when we are doing all this, it's not a one-sided game that we will continue our application and the Chinese will keep looking at it. No. It's a very dynamic thing, as Dr. Jaishankar said, and there will have to be some reactions which will be coming from the other side. So when you're looking at this kind of a deterrence and engagement coming into play in terms of the defense diplomacy also going on, you're looking at certain actions which may be taken by the Chinese. So if you look at Galwan and if you look at the Ladakh border, we had some discussion in the morning. It is a continuous pressure point, and it is a variable pressure point. It goes across the border. So if you look at Arunachal and you look at the central sector, so eastern sector, middle sector, northern sector, these are continuous pressure points which will be leveraged by the Chinese. There's no doubt about it. We understand that. The point is how good we are to counter these pressure points. How effectively can we counter these pressure points? So identification of those points which will cause us pain and which can be used as variable pressure points. And second, something like Galwan. And second, making sure that the Chinese don't take advantage of that. So that will have to be a part of this equilibrium when we are positioning our deterrence. So LAC and crisis management, the way it happened in 2020, I would say more was expected from the way it was structured. It was slightly under par. Yeah. It was not a par for cost. It was 2 over maybe. So what are we looking at? We are looking at an integrated crisis management and LAC management. When I say the boundary management, okay, separate, but when we are saying the crisis management, across the board. So when we are looking at all elements of this particular framework across the board. So that is what we are looking at. And this integration, because we don't want the external affairs minister to say that when I said that we have reached a strategic partnership with the Chinese, the army was looking at me askance and asking me, what is this strategic partnership all about? Please explain it. That should not have happened. Because if you're sitting together and discussing things all the while, and you're planning together, then you understand each other. Obviously, there are gaps at that point in time. Now, probably there aren't. Economic resilience and selective decoupling. So I'm not saying complete decoupling, I'm saying selective decoupling only. Because when two economies, they are an economy which has grown so rapidly, they have done well, we should compliment them for whatever they've achieved. But we should learn from them, and we should know that they've been able to couple our economy more than the other way around. And we are still dependent on them. While we do this selective decoupling, important thing would be that how we decouple in terms of the critical areas But how we make sure that that 1.4 billion of market is also available to me, and that is what the Chinese are looking at. So when you are looking at economic engagement, this has to be a part of the equilibrium because it's a pain point for both if we disengage. So if it is going to give benefit, and that's what the Chinese are looking at, we must utilize it. So, then reduction of defense dependence on critical fields is something which is very important. Something like APIs, if we got 79% coming from them for a pharmaceutical ingredients or generic medicine, that has to be ways and means. The government is already doing it. They have already done selective decoupling. The Americans are looking at friendshoring. We are talking about China plus one. We are going in the right direction, and I am quite happy about that. Yeah, so there is, of course, trade diversification, which again the government is looking at it very, very carefully, and that's something which is very good. So trade diversification is something which must happen. So China is likely to weaponize the trade. So we should be very careful of this weaponization of trade, and the crisis management group should have, so that means that the Commerce Ministry and maybe the Ministry of, other ministries who are involved with this have to get actively integrated into the crisis management. So the weaponization should not be allowed because it will become a pain point at a point in time. So that should not be allowed. Diplomatic balancing and alliances, I think I've already spoken about it. There has to be multilateral pressure. The Chinese, obviously, even when they developed the AIIB or when the NDB also came up, the Chinese continue to hold maximum stake in the AIIB, maybe more than, say, 50%, 60%, though they have cut down unilaterally their voting rights in that. So, but still, the stake is theirs. It is their bank, more or less. So it's the NDB which will give us benefits, and it's the Global South which will give us the benefits. And we should not de-link from the Global South. We have got a good way of going about it, and I'm happy that we are going in the right direction. We cannot be decoupled from the Global South. We are their voice. Neighborhood first, we have already discussed it in the morning. I don't think there's anything to be added, but we have to take neighborhood along with us. We cannot have any pearl of strings, leave aside the neighborhood. There's no pearl of strings. And of course, we must hedge other powers. We must hedge America. We must hedge European Union. We must hedge ASEAN. These are the paths to be hedged while we are going ahead with this particular equilibrium. So proxy employment we have talked about, and the Chinese challenging our role and responsibilities in the Global South, it will need a very, very active counter. And I'm sure the think tanks in Delhi are thinking about it already. Border management we have talked about, and clarification of the LAC, though the Chinese are not in favor of it. Primarily because they feel that if we go to clarification of the LAC, there'll be more areas of dispute which will come up. The areas of dispute which are already existing are more than enough for them to achieve their aims. So,
could you please wind up, General Chauhan? Could you wind up?
Okay, sir. Done, sir. Done, sir. Done. So, LAC clarity, buffer zones, these things we are already looking at. Internal cohesion to avoid any hybrid threat mitigation, that is something very important. There are important cards, Tibet card, the Arunachal card, how they have to be played. I think we have to play them, but how we have to be played, that is known. So we have to focus on our niche advantages. I will go to the Indian Ocean region and say that, this is the time when we have a dominant navy. It's not a pushback. It cannot be pushed back. If we've got a dominant navy, it should exercise itself in the Indian Ocean. It should exercise that power in the Indian Ocean. That will give us benefit. So when we look at it, it's going to be a long game. It's a game of patience. So we have to have patience, and we have to be ready. So basically, I have put my points across. So to wind up, I will only say 2-3 things. We may be looking at managed rivalry of a security equilibrium with controlled brinkmanship. Very carefully I'm using this word, with controlled brinkmanship. Okay? and engagement which would test our political, diplomatic, and military capabilities. It will test all three and the other ministries. And this is the challenge of the 21st century for the balance of the year. If we don't meet up with this challenge, we are not there. Thank you.